All right, now for the last talk of the technical track today, we have Filip Rakowskico, Chief Development Experience Officer at Vue Storefront, who will tell you that you're probably using Lighthouse wrong.
Yeah. Hey everyone, how are you doing? Do you like the event? Oh, you're so energized. You're so energized. Yeah, I love it. I literally arrived in the middle of the night. My plane was delayed 3 times. I spent half of the day at the airport, but luckily I'm here. And I'm super happy about this. I've also heard that my 30-minute talk has only 20 minutes. And also I'm going to use external laptop for the first time in my life. So let's see what could go wrong. So I came here to talk a little bit about Google Lighthouse. And if you haven't heard my introduction, yeah, my name is Filip Rakowskico. I'm a co-founder and Chief Developer Experience Officer at Vue Storefront. If you never saw anyone with a title Chief Developer Experience Officer, yeah, this is because this title, I think, doesn't exist. I invented it for myself, but there's a very good reason for that. And I'm also a Technology Council member of MACH Alliance. How many of you know MACH Alliance? Not many. You should Google that. Yeah, and what Vue Storefront does, like, anyone knows Vue Storefront? Good, good. So for those who don't know, like, Vue Storefront was basically the first ever progressive web application for Magento. We did it in 2017, and since then we came a very, very, very long way. Right now we are not only for Magento, and we are not only for Vue as well. But our goal was always quite simple. Like, we wanted to accelerate and simplify development of storefronts because we know that it is painful, because we know it is time-consuming. And we also feel like, you have all of those WYSIWYG builders, then you have just writing code. It would be nice to have something in the middle. So we're trying to be that thing in the middle. And one of our selling points is performance. We are talking about this a lot with our customers before they buy, after they buy. And unfortunately, it looks like most of them doesn't really understand that Lighthouse is just a number. And they really think that performance equals Lighthouse score, which is a huge problem, really a huge problem. And I think most of the agencies or even, freelancers here had issues with that, had issues with business owners that think they know everything and that they think that, they will just run an audit, go straight to you and tell it is good, it is bad. It doesn't work this way. It's not as easy as that. For example, take a look at this picture. I hope you see it. So raise your hand if you think performance is good here. Okay. Raise your hand if you think performance is bad here. Raise your hand if you have no idea if it is good or bad. Okay, so like most of you didn't raise your hand for some reason. Anyway, I won't answer this, but at the end of this talk, you will know very well if the performance in here is good or bad. So, in our industry, performance is one of the really most important things to optimize, right? Like Amazon did a study about the impact of performance on the revenue. And what they discovered is that every 100 milliseconds of slowdown costed them 1% in revenue. So for Amazon, it's really like literally millions of dollars. And speaking about numbers, if you ever need a good argument to persuade your boss about investing in performance, this is the website for you. It has tons of stats coming from real-world cases where they showed how optimizing performance improves the business metrics. So if you're struggling with getting a buy-in for performance in your company, this is really a website worth visiting. So this is crazy from today's perspective, but 6 years ago, when we were writing the first lines of code for Vue Storefront, performance wasn't really a topic at all in the web dev industry. It was non-existent. And at that time, JavaScript, single-page frameworks, they were getting popularity. Angular, of course, it was the most popular one. Then we had React. Then we had a lot of other contenders from which many doesn't exist anymore or have a very, very marginal communities. And Vue was just getting this attention of the wider front-end community. And at that time, really, almost no one cared how fast those things are. No one really cared how much JavaScript they add. And over time, it became a problem. Because as long as we're using PCs and laptops as our primary machines, everything was going quite well. Because yes, like the number of kilobytes shipped per website was growing. But at the same time, our CPUs were getting better. Our internet bandwidth was getting better. So we really didn't see that. The issue started arising when mobile phones started to become like a preferred way of browsing web, and this happens like five years ago, more or less. So at that time, in 2017, which was 6 years ago, so according to Google research, in 2017, it took on average 15 seconds to fully load a website on a smartphone. Imagine 15 seconds. Like, how frustrated would you be? The attention span of today's teenager is like half a second. So you could imagine it's a disaster for most of the websites, really. 15 seconds is a disaster. And at that time, the awareness about the impact of performance on the conversion, it started to arise a little bit. But what we are missing is a good way to measure that, a way that is kind of like a single source of truth that everyone could use and refer to, and that maps performance to user experience. And everything has changed when Google Lighthouse started getting popularity. So I remember it was introduced and became extremely, extremely popular, followed by PWA hype. And at that time, really, people had no idea how it works. People had no idea also how PWAs works and what is the real value coming from PWAs. Honestly, I think not much changed since then. So what makes Lighthouse so widely adopted then? I think the answer is its simplicity. So you run a test, you get a number between 1 and 100 that tells you how good or how bad your performance is. The only problem is that it's not that simple. Everyone can understand this number, and this is really the root of the problem. Yes. Because web performance or user experience, it really cannot be measured by a single number. It cannot be expressed by a single number. In addition, there is a lot of nuances around how Lighthouse itself works that you have to be aware, or otherwise you'll be misled. We'll talk about them just in a moment. So let's start with a simple question. What does Google Lighthouse really measure? And how we can use this information? So I have a feeling that a lot of people doesn't really try to answer that question. They are just assuming that the score has to be high to be good, and that's it. And that's really a problem. So as we can see on Google Lighthouse website, the goal of Google Lighthouse is to measure page quality. And the audit divides the quality into 4 categories. There's performance, there's accessibility, there are best practices, there's SEO. It also checks if this is a PWA. And all of those combined should give you more or less a good perspective on how good your website is. And by that, try to accurately predict how good the user experience of your users is. Try to predict here is really a keyword, because the truth is no audit will tell you that. No audit will give you a definitive answers on how good or how bad your user experience is. And Google always has promoted this performance score as the most important one. And in the heads of the general audience, Lighthouse score means performance score. So in the light of the previous slide, a quality website means a fast website. And this is really how a lot of people think these days. And don't get me wrong here. Like, performance is obviously a super, super important metric. It is very important to have good performance. But it's just a single metric, really. It's just a single metric, Lighthouse score. It is telling you absolutely nothing about how good or how bad the experience of your user is. All the Lighthouse metrics, honestly, they also tell you nothing about how good your user experience is. You know what will tell you? Your users. And you could be really surprised how much their experience differs from what you assumed from numbers. So Yeah, so if you want to use the data in your decision-making process, the data from Google Lighthouse, it is super important to put it in the right context. Otherwise, it is very easy to make bad decisions. And I have a good analogy for that. So I keep telling that Lighthouse is nuanced, etc. But all we see is that there is a single number, and it comes from Google. Like, it obviously has to be true, right? So let's talk about something else. Let's talk about BMI. Who knows BMI, body mass index? OK, it is a good analogy to the Lighthouse score because BMI is basically a metric that is telling you if you're obese or not, or maybe you need to put a little bit more weight. Basically, it tells you the relation between your health and the weight. And if you look at this scale, what we can say is that if does someone that has 30 BMI is obese, just looking at this scale, would you say that? Yes. Looking at the scale, someone with 30 BMI is obese. But if we dig a little bit deeper into how this is being interpreted, we will see that the results are interpreted completely differently for different kind of people, for different groups of people. So older adults, women, muscular individuals, for them the interpretation is different. But let's go further. The list really doesn't end here. The interpretation for children and adolescents is also different. And really the only group that comes to my mind that actually fits that BMI algo are non-muscular middle-aged men. And the initial results could feel like you know what is going on, and they could lead you to a very bad decision. For example, if you're a muscular man and you have a high BMI, and then you will see, OK, I'm obese, you will start losing weight for no good reason. But it could get even worse. For example, we could look at these numbers, and we could very easily come to the conclusion that we need to stop eating cheese. So let me quickly explain then how Lighthouse works, where this magical number is coming from. So then we have all the right context to actually understand if this score really tells us what it tells, and if it is something that we should even care about. So first of all, the Lighthouse score, it is generally calculated from a bunch of different numbers. It is a one number that other numbers contribute to. So we have different performance metrics. Each of those metrics has a different weight, which is also super important because if you want to optimize Google Lighthouse, then we could just look at those weights and see what is actually contributing to it the most, and then we could just fix it. So I highly encourage you, to do this when you're optimizing your website. Then another nuance is that this scoring, it is changing. And it is changing with every iteration of Google Lighthouse, which sometimes happens every year, sometimes happens every few months. And there is really nothing unusual in here, because Google keeps learning how performance is affecting user experience, how it is affecting business metrics, and then it is updating the algorithm. Also, it is getting a lot of feedback from the developer community. This is why it doesn't really make sense to compare Lighthouse score before the implementation and after the implementation, because the score could change during that time, but not because you changed something. It could change because the scoring has changed. So always look at the individual metrics, because often, not only the weights of the metrics change. If you look here, even the metrics themselves have changed. OK, so that's half of the truth. We already know what contributes to the Lighthouse score. These are just some of the metrics that has different weights. But what matters a lot is also where do we run Lighthouse score, because depending on where do we run it, those numbers could be completely different. Perfect. So I think the most common way of running Lighthouse is running it through Chrome DevTools. How many of you runs it from Chrome DevTools? Keep your hands up. Higher, higher. Now, keep your hands up if you're running it in incognito mode. OK, that's good. That's good. Because when we are running this in the Chrome DevTools, this is probably the least reliable way of measuring. Like I can guarantee you that if you run it on 5 laptops, you will have 5 scores, and they will be significantly different. Sometimes the difference will be 10. Sometimes the difference will be 20. Sometimes even more. It happens because when we're running it in the browser, our CPU, our network speed, our extensions, they're all affecting the score. We could apply throttling, of course, we could run it in the incognito mode. Then this factor is a little bit mitigated, but still you could have completely different scores. So I really don't recommend using Chrome DevTools for using Lighthouse. Another option is we are going to the page speed insights. So page speed insights is a website that is coming from Google itself. And then what you could do is you could just give the URL of your website. It will run the Lighthouse score on one of the Google data centers, usually the one that is closest to you, but sometimes they are busy, so it could pick another data center. This is why also you usually have different numbers when you're running tests one after another. Recently, they started caching it, so you shouldn't have that anymore. But the reality is it could run on different data centers. Those data centers, they could have a different load. Also, all the APIs that you are calling, they could also be called from a different data centers under different loads. So it's very hard to have consistency here. But the good news is the Lighthouse score is just part of this page speed insights audit. The most important part is what you see at the top. And it's good that it is at the top right now, because it used to be at the bottom. So what you see at the top is real world data. So the data that is collected from your users. So every time someone runs your website on Chrome, they are sending their performance metrics to Google. And this is available on something called Chrome User Experience Dashboard. I will talk about that in a moment. But in general, if you run this page speed insights, you can see both like a synthetic run, this Lighthouse being run on a data center, and a cumulative scoring for individual metrics that are coming from a real world, assuming people are using Chrome. And looking at the real world data outside of it, I can only say that usually those numbers are lower than in reality, because people who are using iPhones, this is a high-end device. You're usually getting better results. And this you have mostly from Android users and the Chrome users. When we are looking at the mobile score, it's purely Android users. So another thing is, even if we take all of that into account, even if we take into account all this variability on different environments, etc., Lighthouse score is just an algorithm. It gets input, then it returns output. So it's quite easy to trick it if you know how it works. And this is exactly what people are doing. So for example, when it comes to the accessibility, I absolutely love this article. You can make a screenshot and just paste the title. A guy made a perfectly inaccessible website with a perfect Lighthouse score on accessibility. With performance, it's actually even easier. So what people do is that you can detect if this is Lighthouse running your website. So what people do is that they render the page on the server side. Then they send the HTML. There is a middleware that removes all the script tags from the HTML. JavaScript, in 99%, this is the bottleneck of any website. So what you're getting in return is that you're basically getting a server-side rendered version of your website without JavaScript being shipped to Google Lighthouse. So of course, the score is super high. And there was a company here that I will name it, because they are obvious cheaters. There is a company that actually used to do a lot of that. It's called ScanDPWA. But the truth is, if we think why companies are doing that, they're doing that because Google made us all believe that this is an ultimate source of truth. So everyone are flexing right now just to improve the Lighthouse score. And it is kind of like a snowball effect, but it shouldn't really work like that. So coming to the end, we know how it works. We know that it's super nuanced. We know that it is super easy to trick it. So you could get a perception that I hate Lighthouse, that I think it's a terrible tool. But the truth is, I love Lighthouse. I think it's a wonderful tool. And nothing, really nothing, grew awareness about performance as much as Google and Lighthouse. The problem is not in the tool. The problem is in a way how we are using or misusing it. And it's also important to understand that 100 is never a goal. Like 100 Lighthouse score should never be your goal, because performance is a trade-off. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a feature. Sometimes you have to sacrifice an analytics script. It's a business decision. Like, it's not always worth sacrificing, for example, analytics for the sake of having like a little bit better performance. You always have to weight it. Like, if you have 100 performance, it means that you just optimize everything for performance. Is this the best business decision? I can guarantee you that in most cases, it's not. also, for the e-commerce, I think good score is like around 60, 70, sometimes 80. For a blog, everything below 100 is just a shame. So always look who is your competitor, look at the websites with a similar complexity, compare yourself to them, not just blindly look at the scale. Yeah, this is quite nice usage for Lighthouse, the one that I'm actually using it for. So Lighthouse is not very good at determining if your users are having good experience, but it is absolutely a perfect tool to actually measure how your performance is changing. So the only input that you provide is basically a new version of your website. The output that you're getting is a Lighthouse score, but you really shouldn't look at this score as a source of truth. You should look at this only to see if there was an improvement or decrease in performance, and maybe see how severe it is. And then decide, OK, do we accept that? Like, OK, these are the features that landed. Like, are we OK with sacrificing a little bit of performance for that? Maybe we would like to tweak a little bit more. Maybe we will just not roll it into the production. I hope I still have some time. But really, don't use Lighthouse to measure how users are experiencing your website, because it's just useless for that. And I can say this with a full confidence after years of using Lighthouse, just don't. First of all, it's easy to trick. Secondly, there are so many variables. The third thing, we always need to look at the business metrics. I saw a lot of shops, actually, that had performance decreased on the Lighthouse score. But if you look at the actual metrics, what they improved, for example, was time to first byte, which is a super important metric, because until that happens, your user basically sees nothing, and they don't download anything. So I've seen a lot of websites that had worse Lighthouse score, but they optimized the right metrics, and their business metrics has grown. So don't really use Lighthouse to measure how your users are experiencing your website. Use Core Web Vitals for that. So at this page speed insights audit, at the top, what you will see are Core Web Vitals. These are 3 key performance metrics, and they're also affecting SEO, which is super important. One of those metrics is going to be replaced with another one. So at the very bottom, you have interaction to next paint, which will be a new interactivity metrics. And it is super important to look at this as well, because total blocking time, the metric that right now is an interactivity metric, it scores extremely, extremely different than interaction to next paint. So you can be prepared for Core Web Vitals in the future. What you could also do to see the real-world performance is going to something called Chrome User Experience Dashboard. And Chrome User Experience Dashboard is basically a place where you could look at all this data that is collecting from the Chrome and Android devices and look how it's changed for a website over time, see how it is distributed by device, etc. This is completely free. You can do this for any website. This data is publicly available. So you can also use it to compare yourself to the competition. You can also make it generate you a report, let's say, every month, where it compares like your performance to competitors, certain metrics. It is super powerful. So Chrome User Experience Dashboard, this is the keyword that you want to remember. And just for the end, I hope you get the point already. I hope I convinced you, but in case you don't, let me just show you some examples, including the example from the from the beginning of the presentation, that are showing that the real-world data and the Lighthouse data, they could be really out of sync. So here we have the Adidas website from the beginning of the presentation. And right now, I'm asking the question again. Do you think this website has a good performance? Raise your hand. Do you think it has bad performance? Raise your hand. We are shy. Some of them are. Yes, yes. It has bad performance, really, if you look objectively. These are Core Web Vitals. 2 of them are red, like terrible situation. 1 of them is yellow. So this is the real performance. This is bullshit. This doesn't matter. So yeah, I hoped you like the presentation. I hope you learned something important. And well, thank you so much. I'm running a developer newsletter, by the way, where I'm talking about performance, headless, also a lot about Vue Storefront. It's kind of my place where I build in public and write my own stuff. So you can also subscribe to this. And well, it's time for the closing keynote. Thank you so much for having me.